Gather round and join me on another journey. Today, I'm going to share with you the epic tale of a young captive called Akumbe, a wicked king and a beautiful blind princess. It is a story of love, loyalty, and transformative power of kindness. This is a story as told by Afrikanza. But before we get into the story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more African history, folk tales, and myths. In the heart of Africa, nestled between rolling hills and vast savannas, lay the village of Maluba. This small tight-knit community thrived on mutual support and sharing, where everyone knew each other's names, stories, and struggles. Despite the villagers' poverty, the air was filled with laughter and music, and the villagers found joy in simple things: beautiful sunsets, bountiful harvest, or successful hunts. The men of Maluba were skilled hunters, venturing into the wilderness with bows and arrows, returning with tales of bravery and feast of fresh meat. The women tended to the land, cultivating crops to sustain them through the seasons. They worked hard, but their labor was rewarded with a sense of community and belonging. Every Wednesday, the villagers gathered for Nkumba, a day of sharing. They would bring whatever food they had, and everyone would contribute to the feast. The elderly would share stories of the past, the children would play games, and the young adults would dance to the rhythm of drums. On this day, no one went hungry and no one felt alone. The spirit of Nkumba was a beacon of hope in the face of adversity. In stark contrast, the king Alajo, the ruler of the land, embodied selfishness and greed. He had 8 wives, each vying for his attention, and 22 daughters who were often left to the care of servants. The king's obsession with wealth and power knew no bounds. He would take the best of everything for himself, leaving his people to struggle. The villagers toiled in the fields, hunted in the forests, and worked tirelessly, only to see their hard-earned produce and riches taken away by the king's men. The king feasted on fine meats, drank rare wines, and adorned himself with gold and silver. While his people went hungry, his palace was a symbol of opulence, with grand halls, lavish furnishings, and extravagant decorations. One day, a severe drought hit the land, and the crops began to wither. The king saw this as an opportunity to further exploit his people. He took more of their produce and punished anyone who dared to question his authority. The king had 20 dogs, and they were fed with meat, and anyone who crossed him would be thrown to the dogs as punishment. The villagers lived in fear of the king's wrath, and many suffered in silence. Despite the king's cruelty, his 22 daughters were admired by many village men. Abonu, the eldest, was particularly beautiful, with dark skin, gorgeous eyes, and a curvaceous figure. She was intelligent, kind, and compassionate, and many wondered why she hadn't married off yet. It was rumored that anyone who married Abonu would become the future king, but the king's wickedness made everyone hesitant to approach her. The villagers continued to suffer, but they didn't give up. They shared what little they had and supported one another. The spirit of Nkumba remained strong, a beacon of hope in adversity. They whispered among themselves about the king's cruelty and greed, and wondered why the gods had allowed such a man to rule over them. As the drought worsened, the villagers grew weaker and their crops withered away. The king, however, remained unaffected, feasting on the finest delicacies and enjoying the luxuries of his palace. His people suffered, but he didn't care. He was too busy accumulating wealth and power to notice the desperation in his people's eyes. The villagers prayed for rain, for relief from the drought and the king's tyranny. They prayed for a hero to rise up and challenge the king's authority. But for now, they would continue to suffer in silence. their spirits sustained by the hope of a better future. The kingdom was in turmoil as the king's eldest daughter, Abonu, fell seriously ill. She was cold, her eyes were gone, and nobody knew the cause of her mysterious illness, nor did anyone know the solution to it. The wicked King Alaju became sad and worried, for this was his favorite daughter, Abonu, the future queen of the land. The king's usual stern demeanor softened slightly as he watched his daughter suffer. The king searched for help far and wide, consulting the wisest men and women in the land, but to no avail. Abonu's sickness escalated and worsened as she lost her sight. It was rumored that it was the king's wickedness that had brought this curse and calamity upon his favorite and first daughter. Many believed that the gods were displeased with the king's actions, and this was their way of punishing him. The king sent messages across the land that anyone who could heal his daughter would be the one to marry her, and he promised to give this person a lot of gold too. Many village men, spiritualists, hunters and herbalists came from far and near, but none of them was able to heal the beautiful Abonu. All hope was getting lost. As the days turned into weeks, the kingdom's morale began to sink. The villagers, who had grown accustomed to the king's tyranny, couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that the king's own daughter was suffering. However, they still held out hope that someone would come and heal Abonu. But then, there was a common man in the village, one who was not regarded by anyone, one who was held captive during the war between another village in the south and had served the king throughout his own life. His name was Akumbe. Akumbe never had any friends, even amongst the servants. All he knew was serving the king his entire life. He was very reserved and very obedient too. You would hardly hear Akumbe talk. Akumbe was the one in charge of feeding the 20 huge and ferocious dogs of the king, Alaju. These dogs were feared by everyone in the kingdom, and the thought of being thrown to them was a fate worse than death. On one fateful morning, Akumbe bowed down before the king and told him he could help heal his daughter. The village people laughed at him and doubted, because even the powerful could not heal this mysterious sickness. The king asked, "How dare you tell me you can heal my daughter? What do you know, you poor captive?" Akumbe went down on his knees and told the king to trust him for only once. The king, desperate for a solution, looked at Akumbe with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He said, "If you fail to heal my daughter, I will throw you and feed you to the dogs." Akumbe nodded and agreed, knowing the risk, but seemingly undeterred. Akumbe went ahead to tell the king to give him 10 days and he would come up with a solution. The king smiled and shook his head, then agreed. Akumbe had been given the greatest test of his life, a test of life and death, a test that would promote him from a mere servant to a future king and husband to the daughter of the king. Akumbe spent most of the first 9 days silent in his room, meditating, singing and crying. Nobody understood his actions. Some said he was preparing for his sad death because of his foolishness. Others whispered that he was probably plotting something, but what, they didn't know. And on the final day, Akumbe stepped into the forest with palace guards following him, making sure that he didn't run away. Akumbe looked at the trees, the herbs, and plucked some leaves. Akumbe took some snails too, picked up some sand, and returned to the village. The guards watched him closely, curious about what he was doing. Akumbe asked the king to bring forth his daughter, and when she was brought forth, Akumbe ground the herbs he took, mixed it with sand, and ground the shell of the snails he picked. Akumbe mixed it with water and began to apply it on the forehead of the beautiful Abonu as she lay there weak. All of the villagers were confused as to what was happening. "What nonsense are you doing to my daughter?" the king asked. his voice laced with skepticism. Akumbe continued, reciting some incantations in a low, soothing voice. The villagers watched in amazement as Abonu's body began to stir. To the surprise of all gathered, the princess regained her sight for the first time in a long while, woke up and spoke. The princess was finally healed by Akumbe. The villagers erupted into cheers and applause, hailing Akumbe as a hero. The king, his wives and his 21 daughters were overjoyed, and for a moment, the king's stern demeanor softened. Abonu, now healed, looked at Akumbe with gratitude and curiosity. This was the first time she was closer to Akumbe, and she knew that he had saved her life. The king approached Akumbe, a mixture of emotions on his face. Akumbe, you have done the impossible, he said. I will keep my promise. You will marry my daughter Abonu and you will be the future king of this land. Akumbe bowed his head, humbled by the king's words. Thank you, your majesty, he said. I am but a humble servant. I do not know if I am worthy of such an honor. The king waved his hand dismissively. You have proven yourself worthy, Akumbe. You have saved my daughter's life. Now, let us prepare for the wedding. It will be grand, and the whole kingdom will celebrate. As the kingdom prepared for the wedding, whispers began to circulate among the villagers. Some were happy for Akumbe, while others were skeptical. A captive becoming the future king? They would say this is unprecedented. Abonu, however, was thrilled at the prospect of marrying Akumbe. She had seen the way he had cared for her, the way he had saved her life. She felt a connection to him that she couldn't explain. As the wedding day approached, Akumbe began to feel a sense of unease. He knew that he would be taking on a great responsibility, not just as the future king, but also as Abonu's husband. He wondered if he was truly ready for such a role, but little did Akumbe know, the king had other plans. Despite the king's promise to let Akumbe marry his daughter, the king had grown increasingly uneasy about the idea of a poor captive becoming his son-in-law. As he lay in bed one night, he thought to himself, how can this poor boy marry my precious daughter? Over my dead body will this happen? The king's thoughts grew more and more sinister as the day passed by. He began to plot against Akumbe, determined to prevent the marriage from taking place. The king would often postpone the wedding date, using flimsy excuses to buy himself more time. But the king knew he couldn't keep postponing the wedding forever. He needed a plan B. One day, he plotted with one of his guards to steal one of his most precious jewels and hide it in Akumbe's room. The guard snuck into Akumbe's room and hid the jewel amongst his belongings. The very next day, the king declared that his precious jewel had been stolen from the palace and declared a thorough search of everyone's room and chamber. The king was furious as he spoke, his voice echoing through the palace. The search began, and soon the jewel was found in Akumbe's room. Akumbe cried and denied that he wasn't the one who stole it, but the king refused to show mercy. You poor wretched thief, and you wanted to marry my daughter, the king sneered. I will feed you to my ferocious wild dogs. Abonu wept bitterly and begged her father to spare Akumbe's life, but the king was unmoved. Akumbe was thrown into the den of wild dogs, his fate seemingly sealed. But the dogs who had grown to love and respect Akumbe refused to harm him. Akumbe had fed and cared for them for several years, and they would not betray him now. 5 days passed and the dogs had not touched Akumbe. The king himself came to check on Akumbe, and to his surprise, he found Akumbe playing with the ferocious dogs. The king's anger boiled over, and he picked up a spear to smite Akumbe, but the dogs, sensing their master's anger, pounced on the king and began to maul him. Akumbe ran out of the cage, calling for help, but it was too late. The king's screams echoed through the palace as the dogs fed on him. News of the king's demise spread quickly through the kingdom. The guard who had hidden the precious jewel in Akumbe's room was consumed by guilt and came forward to confess his role in the king's plot. With the king's death, the kingdom was left without a ruler, but the villagers and elders quickly rallied around Akumbe, recognizing his bravery and loyalty. Abonu too stood by Akumbe, and they were married in a grand ceremony. Akumbe, the poor captive, had become the king, and he ruled the kingdom with wisdom and justice. He and Abonu lived happily ever after, their love and loyalty to each other a beacon of hope for the kingdom. The dogs, who had once been instruments of terror, had become symbols of loyalty and protection, and they remained Akumbe's faithful companions until the end of his days. And so, dear listeners, the tale of Akumbe and Abonu comes to a close, a story of love, loyalty, and the power of kindness in the face of adversity. The wicked King Alajo, who once thought himself above the law, met his demise at the hands of his own ferocious dogs, but Akumbe, the humble captive, rose to greatness through his bravery, wisdom, and devotion to those around him. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded that true strength lies not in power or wealth, but in the relationship we build and love we share with others. Akumbe's bond with the dogs who refuse to harm him, despite their ferocity, is a testament to the transformative power of kindness and compassion. And so, let this story be a reminder to us all that even in the darkest of times, hope and redemption are always possible. May the tale of Akumbe and Abonu inspire us to cultivate love, loyalty, and wisdom in our own lives, and may their legacy live on in our hearts forever. This is a story as told by Afrikanza. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales, history, and myths. Thank you for watching.